All right, welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Mike Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Already an eventful night here down at Bally Sports North. First of all, Anthony's told me what time to be here. I pull up to the intersection. I see Anthony walking with his head down the other way, away from the studio. I'm like, hey, LaPanta.
I was walking to Starbucks, so let's be correct on the details of the story. 6:30 was the time I said.
10 minutes early.
And so I timed it to walk to Starbucks. I walked back to the front door of my office at 6:28.
Yeah,
and
you were on time.
Ready to go.
And then I texted you, and I'm like, I texted you a picture of the television screen right in front of Bally Sports North that said technical difficulties, please stand by. And then we walked in, and everybody was calm. I was always, you always want to know when there's technical difficulties at home when you're watching a telecast, like what's going on behind the scenes. But everybody was pretty chillaxed here when we walked in. They're like, Corey Provost was doing the call of the game, like over the graphic by his telephone.
I've had to do the same thing with a hockey game over the phone before. It's happened a couple times, actually. One time when I was calling Gopher games, and one time, I can't remember if it was an exhibition game with the Wild or if it was...
It was something with the Wild.
I know it was a Wild game. I just can't remember if it was an exhibition game or a regular season game. And it didn't last very long, but... they'd lost audio, so I dialed into some consortium and called the game that way for a short period. But we've got a great crew, and they deal with this kind of stuff. And actually,
and apparently they lost Wi-Fi in that stadium.
There's a bad storm in Tampa tonight in St. Petersburg. The weather's terrible, I guess. And last night they had some difficulties where the switcher, which is for people that don't know, the piece of equipment in the TV truck where what goes on the air is determined. So all the cameras that you see, the wipes to a replay, when a graphic comes in or out, it's all controlled by the switcher, and they lost it. It just locked up and froze up. So they were stuck on one camera for a while. And then, they go through and had to figure out a way to get the Tampa television feed to use that for a short term until they got the switcher rebooted and reconnected, reconfigured, whatever they had to do. And so at one point last night, we were taking the Tampa television feed. Well, sometimes they're running a promo or something. And at one point they went to their sideline reporter, who we obviously can't hear. We're just using their video and have our announcers over it. So she's just talking, and Corey and Denard Span have nothing. They can't do anything except just say, this is the Tampa feed you're watching on TV, so we have no idea what she's talking about or anything else. So it's a challenge, and stuff like that happens. You never want to see it, but there is a little bit of you that these are the kind of times where the best separate themselves from the others. How do they quickly adjust? How do you quickly come up with a solution that is the best case the best case scenario, so to speak? And our guys are really good at that. And they're not the only ones. Other markets have to deal with it too. But we've had it 2 nights in a row here in the studio.
Yeah, and you can tell the graphics aren't back because right now there's nothing on there, no banners, nothing.
Yeah, that was last night too. It kind of threw you back a little. And I've had this conversation with my boys a couple times. I remember I was in college when Fox bought the rights to the NFL for the first time. Mm-hmm. And at that time, Fox, if you remember, it had like The Simpsons and 21 Jump Street, and might have had one other show, Married with Children maybe was an early Fox show, if I remember right. Those are the only shows that were on. They were trying to legitimize themselves. It was ABC, NBC, CBS at that time. Fox bought the rights to the NFL, and people were making jokes like, what are they going to do, have Bart Simpson doing the play-by-play and everything? And, well, they didn't do that. But what they did do was introduce the score bug, which was known as the Fox box at that time, that put the score up in the screen with the clock at all times.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it had never been there. So this was 1987 or 88. And I remember listening to people talk about that. What in the world? I got to sit and watch the score at all times. Up until then, it would pop up on the screen when somebody scored or when they went to commercial break, and that was about it. And you just got used to watching. You didn't just flip onto a game and immediately know the score of the time. And my boys were like, well, who would watch TV that way? I said, that's how it was done.
Yeah.
This is what it looked like, what we're watching right now.
Did you ever have an ESPN beeper? Remember those things?
I didn't have the ESPN, the pager.
Yeah, I love that thing.
I didn't have the pager, but I remember some guys did, and then you'd get the alerts when you hear the little music when
But I mean, you just think about that. Like, I remember covering high school football games and thinking it was like so cool that I knew what was going on in the world because I know it's the score of some random 7th inning in October, or September or something during football season. It was like, I don't know.
Well, when I was doing Twins games on the radio, this was still late 90s. Not everybody was online during these games, so we still used Sports Ticker at that time. Mm-hmm. And every press box had a Sports Ticker computer that you could go back and look at what was happening in the other games. Yeah. And then we did get a laptop in our booth about halfway through that season that you'd connect to Sports Ticker. So it wasn't just like to go to ESPN.com. And the Sports Ticker would give you a little update whenever anything happened, any scoring change or pitching change or anything in any game. But you had to kind of keep a running sheet of what was happening in these games. And part of my job was I did the out-of-town scoreboard on the postgame show. So I'd be trying to keep a little running tally of who had done what in these games because it wasn't like you could just access the real-time box score until the game was over. And so a lot of times I'd want to know, like, well, this guy had a 2-run double in that inning, and this guy had a 2-run home run in this inning. And so I'd be keeping a running tally of every other baseball game while I was calling the Twins games on the radio off of the Sports Ticker computer. And it's a side note to the story, but I remember, I think I've told the story before, that one of my all-time favorites was Jack Buck calling the Cardinals games on KMOX. And I used to, whenever it would get dark, I would be able to pick up the Cardinals games at home. And he would always, in the last segment of the postgame show, he'd be about ready to sign off, and he would just say, he'd go to break, and he would just say, I'll check the ticker and be back in a moment. And then he'd come back from this last break with the last updates of what was happening elsewhere in baseball. He'd give a couple, this guy just homered in the 8th. They're up now. These guys are now in the 9th. And that was it. But every single night, I'll check the ticker and be back in a moment. And I used to love it because I'd get that last deal, because otherwise you wouldn't get the results until the next day's newspaper.
Yeah. I mean, it was back in the day. That's how you found out stuff. I remember anybody that's listening to this podcast that worked at a sports department at a newspaper in the 90s knows that half our phone calls that we would get at the newsroom would be people like, can I get the Yankees score? And then the same person will call up 30 minutes like, can I get the Yankees score? Can I get the Red score? I mean, that's how people would find out stuff, where you'd have to wait till the next day. I remember WQAM used to have a late night guy who was the greatest voice. He honestly in high school would like put me to sleep with his voice. So then I became friends with him, which was real exciting when I got in the business. But a guy named Ed Kaplan, but his entire show from like 9 p.m. to the last score every single night of every single weekday, his entire show, and he wouldn't go off until the last score of the night, whether even like University of Hawaii games. He would just read the box scores. He would read the highlight scores, like the local highlight, like, local track, all that. He was a big gambler too. So a lot of highlight and track. That's how I first heard the name Gostisbehere. Shane Gostisbehere's dad was a big pro highlight player down in Miami back in Dania Highlight, actually, back when I was a kid down there. All right, we're coming to you from the Aquarius Home Services studio. Our next live show is September 19th at 7 p.m. at Tuttles, and then we're going to have a couple shows in October as well. Hopefully one right before their opening night and one after we're back from that long road trip. So pay attention to that. But again, September 19th, 7 p.m., the night of the first day of training camp. So we'll have a lot to talk about, and we might even have a guest out there at Tuttles. So 7 p.m. Anthony, I know we've done a podcast on this exact date before because tonight is the 18-year anniversary of one of the most pivotal moments of your career on television, you and Burt Blyleven. It's always the first thing I see in the morning on this date.
I don't know if I'd call it a pivotal moment in my career, but it was memorable, that's for sure. Yeah. And I will never forget it. There's so many things, and I saw a bunch of the things on Twitter today that on this day in history kind of thing. And
Young
there are
Anthony
so many,
Panther.
there's so many elements to it that are are bizarre. Yeah, and that's one of them. My producer, Chris Withers, who you know, and he's in my ear like, what did he just say? What? Do something. And it's like, well, we're live, and
he's like, let's do it again.
So
and you're like, well, we're live.
Yeah. So there was that part. At that time, Vinny was. I can't remember the year. Was it 2004? It was 2006. So Vinny would have been 10. And Margot texted me and said, hey, I was in the other room. Vinny just came walking in and said, Bert said the F word on TV. And I said, yep, well, Vinny's right. and she's like, what? How did that happen? I said, it's a long story. I might just have to call you after the game. So there's that part. And I knew Bert didn't understand just how bad this could be. Like there was a chance that a guy could get fired, let go. I didn't really think that was realistic, but I knew it was going to be an issue for him. And I was trying to somehow keep it at least mildly light so that he'd keep focused on the game. Mm-hmm. And so I made this tote board with a legal pad, and I just said number of innings since Bert has cussed. And I'd tear off the next page each time, and we'd high five, and hey, it's 3 innings since you, because I knew that he was starting to hear from other people and was getting rattled, like, why is my agent calling me? And I was like, well, I got an idea why your agent's calling him. And so, he ended up this
is even pre like where everything like, the awful announcing site. And this is like pre GIFs and constant videos on Twitter. And so that happened now. Oh my Lord.
Right. And so it was an honest mistake. There was a mix up in his mind that we had pre-taped one segment of the Open the previous 2 days. And this one we were doing the reverse because we were timing it to cover the anthem. And so it was a reasonable mistake to make. It's not a mistake you can make in the TV business. You have to know better than that. But the end result was okay. I think they suspended Bert for a couple series, but he didn't lose his job or anything, nor should he have. And we moved on, but I think I've shared the story before. There was an ad agency that was doing the Twins. It was back then. It was just the Twins territory commercial campaign, I guess, for lack of a better term. And they had some really funny ones. They had when they were going into Target Field, they had like an Angels fan stick his tongue on the flagpole when it was cold out, and Bud Grant walks by and makes a comment, and construction worker gets hit with a Joe Mauer home run ball or went through a window of a car on the construction site, and Tom Kelly just walks by. Oh, that's a shame, and just stuff like that. They were really clever. But anyway, they had pitched one that had, during the winter caravan, the Twins would take the bus all around Twins territory during the winter, and they were going to have Bert. They're going to have a bunch of guys like climbing off the bus and have this, like the gutter with a cold, slushy snow, like the crap you see in Edmonton on every street corner all winter. And they were going to just show a bunch of the feet. Like
the stuff Leon Draisaitl is going to see the next 9 years.
They're just going to show all these feet jumping over it. And all of a sudden, one foot would step right in it getting off the bus. And they'd pan up and it would be Bert, and they were going to like bleep it out, but just have him cuss, and then have me like lean out of the bus saying, but Bert, we're live. And
I like that.
I actually thought it was really funny. The Twins, I think, thought it was just a little too soon after it happened, and said they didn't want to do it, but it would have been really funny.
I mean, like, my Lord, it's still such a minor thing if you think about it in the grand scheme. I get it was 18 years ago. It's a Hall of Fame pitcher that's doing TV that just brought a little locker room talk on the air. Like, anyway. So let's see, where should we go? You want to start with Draisaitl? Because a lot of Wild fans are wondering how this affects Kaprizov, and I don't think it affects it at all. I mean, the Wild the Wild know that to keep Kirill Kaprizov, they're going to have to pay him legitimate money.
They are. They will.
Austin is making 13.25. Draisaitl's making 14 in 2 years, coinciding, by the way, with the Kaprizov deal. Starting next summer, they're going to work on probably a 16 million plus on McDavid. Look, like it or not, Kaprizov is not in that vicinity. I mean, he's just not. And so I think the Wild have always figured that he's going to be in the 11 to 12 range. I think they'd like to keep that lower. Maybe this ups it a little more. Obviously, a lot of it depends on the year that he has. He is probably, I think he's got all the leverage because he is the superstar, the lone superstar that this franchise has ever had. So to keep him, they might have to overpay a bit. But I've always thought Pasternak's deal makes the most sense for him because I don't think he's Pasternak. But
the only way
the cap's going up, and you're going to have to pay him.
And that's why contracts continue to get bigger and bigger.
Right.
Guys sign them, and the cap goes up 5-6 years later. The highest paid player is making more than the highest paid player was today. The only thing where it could, and it doesn't impact the Wild necessarily in terms of the cap, but the way this deal is structured with signing bonus money, it could affect the actual cash coming out of Craig Leopold's pocket and going into Kaprizov's bank account.
Right.
The
one thing that will have to happen is Craig will have to end his, if they're going to go a contract like that, he will have to change his ways because the Wild don't give out signing bonuses. In my history of covering Craig Leopold-owned teams, the only guy that's gotten a very minimal signing bonus that I can think of is Jared Spurgeon. The Wild just do not do it. Everything is always cash-based during the year, spread out over the length of a season and all that stuff.
And they structured the contracts where there's more money in the front end for sure over time. But the most significant example of that is the Parise Suter contracts, where they were actual money was $1 million a year toward the end of those deals. And I could see that happening. But that might be the only spot where a deal like this could impact you, where if an agent says, hey, look, this guy got this, we want ours structured similarly. That's the only way. It's not going to affect it in terms of how much he gets. I don't think it's not in that term. And it's not like the Wild were going to try and lowball the guy.
Yeah.
They know they have to get him, and I believe they will.
And I think the one thing that's interesting here is that there's been a lot of thought. Now, look, there's no doubt behind the scenes that Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid have talked about what they each want to do. That is actually public knowledge that they have. So clearly for Draisaitl to commit this long, I think he knows that McDavid is going to commit this long to Edmonton and not leave there. What this does that I think is pro-Wild, if you want to be optimistic about it as a Wild fan, is I do think that Draisaitl had a ton of options to go to. And I think he knew that he had a ton of options. But I think for him to commit there, I think shows you that it's enticing. When you were handed a bunch of committed, guaranteed money, before a year, in Kaprizov's case, it would be 2 years of essentially, 1 year really, playing out the final year of his contract and risking significant injury. When they're willing to give that to you now, I think that can be enticing. So if the Wild all of a sudden offer him, $100 million, let's just say, next summer, are you really as a player going to be like, I think I'm just going to take my chances and hope not to have a catastrophic injury? He might. He might say, you know what, I want to see how this year goes. I want to see what other teams come after me. He might. But the other thing is when that money is right in front of you, it takes a lot. And look, Marian Gaborik never really got that money. But he made a lot of money in his career, but he never got that 80 back. Right. In that little short span that the Wild were going to give it to him.
And this is all give and take in negotiations for sure. And the odds of Kaprizov having some kind of debilitating injury are minimal. The odds of Kaprizov having a year that's so lousy that it would change his market value is minimal. But there is still a chance. And I do think there's something to be said for teams that are willing, and they know they have to, be willing. Everything comes at a price. So if you're buying a guy's free agent years, it costs you money. And in this case, it would be the other way around, where the player is getting an advantage from a team willing to negotiate before they have to. So I think it certainly would be something that would work in the Wild's favor if they're able to use that as a bargaining chip, so to speak, to get Kaprizov to agree to a deal.
Let's do this. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and finish this topic off and move on to some others. Hey, it's Russo for Aquarius Home Services. Get ready for the Apex 15 heating and cooling system, a high-efficiency, worry-free solution for your entire home. This system includes a state-of-the-art heat pump and air purification system, plus an industry-leading 15-year parts and labor warranty. And here's the best part. During the mega sale, you can save up to $8,000. Don't miss out. Schedule your free new system consultation today at AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And remember to mention Russo sent you.
Royal Credit Union's smart checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Make the switch to a Royal checking account and you'll also get real-time transaction alerts, free mobile check deposits, and surcharge-free access to over 40,000 ATMs across the U.S. Enjoy financial freedom with no minimum balance and no monthly fees when you switch to Royal's smart checking account. Learn more and open your Royal Credit Union smart checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Again, September 19th is our next live show at Tuttles at 7 p.m. And, you and I have talked about this on the radio the other day, which, Anthony, by the way, I owe you and Margot $58 for the $40
it's just
parking.
On your tab.
Yep. We talked about it. I mean, this is just going to be there's always something that just never stops being a question from Wild fans. This is one that's probably going to be a topic on every show until Kaprizov extends his contract. And the unfortunate part for you and me in this topic is that it's impossible for this to not be a topic until next July 1 at a minimum, because he can't sign till then. So I did see somebody ask me, like, how come the Wild haven't gotten Kaprizov done yet? Well, they can't. It cannot be done until next July 1. Just like Jake Middleton couldn't be done until this July 1, even though we knew for a couple of weeks that deal was done. And just like we knew that Brock Faber couldn't get done until after July 1, but we knew that was going to eventually get done. So this is going to be a topic that we're all going to have to pay attention to. But I do think that it is important that Bill Guerin and Kirill Kaprizov continue a really quality relationship this year, where you're extremely open with Kirill. And I know that Billy knows this, where you're constantly laying out his plan. This isn't just a normal player. He needs to know what the future is, what the prospects are, what the plan is, to turn this team into a consistent contender, because the money here that the Wild are willing to pay him is the same as everywhere else. So you've got to now distinguish yourself on showing him why you want to stay here, what the future is here. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, I do think there's a little bit more involved just through comfort. Once you've been here for a few years, he likes it here, likes the people here, likes the organization here, likes his teammates. So there is a little bit of a hook there where wherever he went elsewhere would be an unknown. So I do think they have a little bit of an advantage because of the fact that you have
guy loves Billy sushi.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you
can't eat sushi anywhere else.
Exactly, not in Minneapolis, is known as a hotbed. I just think you've got some comfort for a guy who's not from the country, who does
have a place in South Florida,
and he's become more comfortable for sure with the language and all that kind of stuff. But there is something to be said for just familiarity with the organization, with the staff, with your teammates, that it's a major adjustment to all of a sudden say, I'm gonna uproot this and go somewhere else.
Yeah, I would agree. And we'll see. I mean, it's going to be an interesting year coming up here. It's very clear. So they're having coaches meetings this week. They're really starting to really put the pedal to the metal to get ready for camp. We're going to start to see a flood of players. There's been already a ton of players here for a while, especially some of the young guys. We're going to see a flood of players coming in this week. Obviously, the Tom Curvis Prospect Tournament this year between Chicago, St. Louis, and Minnesota is in St. Louis. So that'll be interesting to see how the players play there. Ogren and Huznadinov, if I remember correctly, are not in that. So that shows you that they don't want to risk injury with those guys. So a lot going on. Lines will be interesting. It's extremely clear to me, just like we've been saying for a month, that they are going to start with Orion Hartman, Matt Zuccarello, Kirill Kaprizov line. Then what I'm mostly fascinated who's going to wind up again, this is all considered if they're healthy coming out of training camp, Anthony, who the left wing is on that line too, with probably Eriksson and Boldy. Obviously Johansson's going to get a look. We might even see Foligno get a look. We might see Trennan get a look. We might see Gaudreau get a look. But I really hope at some point we see Liam Öhgren there fairly consistently.
I think we'll see Öhgren there. I think if Ryan Hartman does grab the spot between Zuccarello and Kaprizov, it wouldn't shock me if Marco Rossi got a look there. Even though I know that they liked him at center, I think his game's better at center. He also has a little chemistry with Matt Boldy. And this goes back to what we talked about a little bit on last week's show, and you and I talked a little bit on the radio at the fair, that they just have a little more versatility in this year's lineup.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you have Marcus Johansson, who has proven he can play in a top 6 role throughout his career, but you also have options like a Liam Öhgren, like a Marco Rossi, that look like they'd be able to play there, at least at this point.
Yep. So speaking of the devil, you mentioned Vinny LaPanta earlier in this pod, and what are the chances he would just text me? And it's a piercing. Vinny? You did mention Vinny about how told Margot that Bert Blyleven needed his
we talked about those guys in the scoreboard.
Yeah. So really piercing text message here from your youngest son, second oldest child. If you got this text message, how old is he?
He's 28.
He was 28. If you got this 28 years ago, this might have been your last child. And it actually reminds me, I've never actually asked you what you thought of the Draisaitl contract as a whole, because here's this question. Is there a chance, I love the sarcasm of this question. Is there a chance that general managers know more than he does about players? If yes, why would a team pay a guy $14 million a year if you can win with theoretically another guy? If no, reevaluate and go back to the first question.
Well, number one, the answer is yes. And not only is there a chance, every GM in this league knows more than I do. Well, every assistant GM knows more than I do. Every coach knows more than I do. And I still don't believe that you can win a cup. Now,
they have won a lot of playoff series.
I know
those
they
two
have.
Together.
Exactly. And it surprised me. I didn't think that it was possible for them to make the runs they've made the last 2 years with a team built the way their roster is built. And I just don't. It's not the way I would want to build a team.
I get that. They have no choice. Right. They have 2 generational players now. They way overpaid Darnell Nurse, and they're probably going to way overpay Evan Bouchard at some point here. And they're going to have like $40 million more probably wrapped up into 4 players. But can I just say one thing? They got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final with Leon Draisaitl incredibly hurt. Like if he was the real Leon Draisaitl in the Stanley Cup final, there's a very good chance they do win.
There is, and the year before, they made a run deeper than I thought possible. So that's what I'm saying.
They've done that a lot, though.
That's still 2 years in a row.
Yeah, but didn't 4 years ago they go to the conference final too?
Yeah, I think they had the one year where it was they advanced. Was it the COVID year that they went a little further than expected?
I can't remember, but they have won a lot of playoff series. Well more, by the way, than Kaprizov has won here.
No, absolutely. And I'm just walk by,
get a look, and then go back
when apples to say that Kaprizov hasn't won when Draisaitl has when Draisaitl's playing next to Connor McDavid. I mean, that's
usually separate lines.
Right, but I'm just saying, you've got put Kirill Kaprizov on a team with Connor McDavid, and they probably win a couple playoff series too.
So, I buy all my clothes there. My wife loves the place.
I have been.
Every time
I
we
was
go in there. We buy more
with
than we
what the successes they've had in the playoffs. I never would have thought that was possible.
Stuff fits
and
it wears well. I just went on a European vacation
for whatever reason.
Everything I wore was
they have like it was 2 years ago that all of a sudden McDavid started playing differently in the playoffs. It was more McDavid than Draisaitl.
Everything from
and
golf,
the way he played at both ends of the rink and the intensity with which he played every shift,
beautiful Italian.
I had never seen it before from him.
Anywhere,
he took over games. Remember that Calgary series that year? It looked like he could score on every shift, and he almost did. In that series, remember, had like 8 to 6 and 9 to 7 games and something like that.
And
he's a power play machine.
And the same thing happened
in the right circle. He's unbelievable.
And the same thing happened this year with Draisaitl, where it was.
I'm talking about Draisaitl.
Yeah, he played a different game in the playoffs than he's played during the regular season. Where
you need someone on your side who can help you.
I just watched too many shifts of him coasting to the bench while scoring
but
chances going the other way.
Players just play that way.
I know they do.
Job
and I'm
placement,
saying that
retraining,
I didn't
and
think it
payment
was
for
possible to
permanent
get to where they
disability.
did with a
Make
team
sure you are
built
being
around
paid
those
all
two
the work
guys.
benefits you're
And they
entitled
proved
to.
that
Please call the
otherwise by the
attorneys at
fact
Bosch
that
Law Firm.
and
Call is always
look,
free, and there's
they've
never a
had some
fee
good
unless we
fortune.
recover
I think they
benefits on
lose the
your behalf.
Vancouver series
Call
this year if Thatcher Demko's healthy
651-333-8300.
and if Brock Besser doesn't get
Bosch Law
injured
Firm, or
before
visit
Game
us
7 of
at
that series. And that's
workcompexperts.com.
they had to win another round just to get to the finals. I think but to their credit, I mean, I didn't think they'd win the conference final last year, and that was a one-sided series. Dallas got up on them, and all of a sudden, Edmonton, it was men and boys the last 3 games. So, I think they've proven. I mean, not that they care, but it's my impression of them and impression of their team has been proven incorrect by what they've done in the playoffs the last 2 years.
I don't know. I mean, I mean, Draisaitl to me, like, he's an overtime machine. He's a power play machine.
Yeah, that's what I'm
you
saying.
Know, I just the whole they can't win with them. I just think is that has been your premise, though, is that they can't. It's not the way that they're building the team. It's that they can't win with those guys.
Well, it's because those two guys take up so much of your club.
I mean, look at these point totals that he's at: 105, 110, 110, 128, 106.
That you weren't listening to what I said.
I'm listening.
Because what I said is
maybe what you just said now, but I've been listening to you on this podcast for 5 years.
Right, and I'm saying that what they've done in the last 2 postseasons has proven my impression incorrect, because they have done more in the postseason than I thought you could do with a team built around those 2 guys.
Yeah,
and I'm not like when I say I don't believe you win a cup. I didn't think you could get as close to a cup as they've gotten with a team built around those 2. And they've proven that to be wrong, because they have. And those 2 guys, like I watch in the regular season, the way that, yes, they pile up these huge numbers on power plays. And I always thought, I just don't know that you can do that when you get to the playoffs. It just doesn't happen. Well, then it did happen. And they were 50% on the power play in the playoffs. And so Draisaitl from that low circle spot on the power play is absolutely unbelievable. I've never seen anybody that shoots the puck with that kind of efficiency from that spot.
Side,
from that low of a spot.
Yeah.
And yet he just doesn't miss.
Yeah.
So
the other thing about Draisaitl, and say what you want about him and all that, but he is a playoff performer, man, and that's why I just think that they win a cup if he's healthy in that final round. I mean, we're talking this year, 31 points in 25 games, 13 goals in 12 last year, 32 points in 16 last year. Like, until Kaprizov starts producing in the playoffs, other than the one series that he had against St. Louis, where the rest he has not been good in. I know he's been health and things like that. The other thing with the contracts with McDavid and Draisaitl is they're technically both centers, so that changes the complexion again. Let's move on. Let's talk about another coaster, Patrik Laine. You and I have talked a lot about him on the show. One thing I've been really pleased with the last week or so is that which normally you don't see GMs do, is Bill Guerin has essentially confirmed that our reporting at The Athletic was right by admitting on the fan that on KFan that he was in big time on Patrik Laine. But the one thing that you and I talked about off the air before last week's show, that Bill Guerin actually said on Barreiro the other day. I told you when I walked into your house the other day to do podcasts that I didn't want to talk about it on the podcast because I couldn't yet confirm it. But I was starting to hear for a week from sources around the league that Patrik Laine would not waive his no trade clause to come to Minnesota, or he would be a Wild player. And Bill Guerin said, quote, he didn't want to come here on Barreiro the other day, which is to me almost affirms what you always have said about him, which is that this is not a guy you probably want on your team.
No,
who's Patrik Laine
right,
to determine
as
that
we
the
talked,
Wild don't.
Must have been on the radio, not on our pod, but I'd be relieved that the Wild couldn't make that deal. And maybe I'll be proven wrong by that, and he'll go up to Montreal. But who waives a trade, or who says I'm not going to waive to be traded to Minnesota, but I'll go to Montreal? When you look at the rosters of the two teams, there's no comparison.
Yeah.
And the Canadians are years away from contention.
Like, does he think he's like? like Nick Suzuki had a really good second half, but he has not had the greatest run here.
Look at the rest of the roster,
and that's what I mean. Like, it's not like you're signed there for 8 years; you're there for 2. Do you really think? I mean, Kirill Kaprizov got 47 goals playing with Ryan Hartman. You know, like Eric Sinek and Kaprizov had some pretty good chemistry last year. They have Marco Rossi, who had 21 goals. Like, clearly the only reason why he didn't want to come here is his perception the Wild don't have good centers. You tell me that you're going to, right now, over in a 2-year period, say that Montreal's got better overall centers than Minnesota?
Well, or just the way the team is built to compete. I mean, Wild have missed the playoffs twice in a dozen years. Yeah. Do you really want to go to Montreal and say they're better built to compete? It makes you wonder, like, what a guy's motivation is. Is winning at or near the top of his list? It sure doesn't sound like it.
No.
And I don't know the guy personally well enough to say this, but every impression that I have, reading about him, listening to him, 2 teams worth of locker room guys that didn't get along with him or that he didn't get along with. I just don't. I wouldn't touch the guy.
Yeah. And Don Waddell, their GM in Columbus, said on, I don't know if it was a podcast or if it was Brian Hedger, the Columbus Dispatch, or if it was their ColumbusBlueJackets.com writer about 2-3 weeks ago, he insinuated that there was a locker room issue with Laine that is the reason why he wanted out, and that they.
And it was that some of the veteran guys didn't like him, and for whatever you've thought of Columbus's room or their team, their room has always been solid. Yeah. They've always had high quality people inside that locker room.
Cam Atkinson,
Boone Jenner. I mean, all those guys. They're
Johnny Gaudreau,
blue collar, hardworking type guys. And if Patrick Laine couldn't get along with those guys, then he's not going to get along with the guys inside the Wild room.
Yeah, and obviously, again, perception sometimes is reality. We're not in there; we don't know it. But he's certainly. I mean, it just seems. Usually you don't hear a GM say that on the radio, but regardless, it's not a great indictment of the Wild. I mean, it's not. It's a bit of an indictment of the Wild too. If the perception out there is that,
but it's the perception from one donkey that couldn't get along with anybody in either room. I mean,
yeah.
What the hell do we care what he thinks?
Yeah. All right. Good point. What are you looking forward to most about training camp? We're getting to that nitty gritty here. We're 19. We're what is this? September 2nd, 17th, 3rd? We're
about 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks away.
I'm excited.
2 weeks from Thursday.
Well, number one, I'm excited to get back to hockey. I really am. I always am. I love the routine. I love everything about it. I love the way guys work. I love how you ramp up into the season with training camp and getting to see some of the young guys. How do they mix in with the older guys? How do their skills, their speed, how do they match? How do they translate from wherever they've been playing before to the NHL? What are some of the early combinations that look like they have chemistry? What do guys look like after their summer? Do they come back like, holy cow, did you see him? He looks like he's added 10 pounds of muscle. I love just getting back to talking to the coaches about the intricacies of the game. I'm anxious to see some of the changes. So there's a few things to. It's a long-winded way to answer your question, but I'm anxious to see the young players. I want to see Marco Rossi, Liam Ogren, Marat Husnadinov. How do those guys look height? How do those guys look compared to the stars that you know are going to be a part of the Wild lineup? Number two is this will be the first camp John Hines has run, and I'm anxious to see how it's different. He came in last year and tried to make some very minor changes as he was jumping in when the team was at full speed already. Now, how does it look when you get a chance to implement your systems from day one, your penalty kill from day one, your power play, all of the little things that he seems to be such a detail guy with? I'm anxious to see now how that gets put in, how it meshes with the players. And, how just some guys, what their relationship and comfort level might be with what is now essentially an entirely new staff from 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, there's almost no carryover. I mean, the entire staff has now been changed in the last 3 years.
Yep. I'm looking forward to interviewing Jack Capuano. I love his accent. We'll be right back.
If you're grilling steaks or cooking steaks anyway, best place to get them is at Feller's Ranch. You can go to fellersranch.com. It's Minnesota's premier Wagyu ranch. Their Wagyu is unbelievable. The marbling is second to none. The ribeyes are terrific. We've had the New York strips recently. You can find them at a few local restaurants, but you can also have them delivered to your home. Their vans are in the cities a couple times a week. They're available at a couple of butcher shops. Just check it out at fellersranch.com and you won't be disappointed.
Back here, Worst Seats to the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, final segment of the show. Again, next live show, September 19th at Tuttles at 7 p.m. A couple shows in October that we'll do as well. Anthony, while we were recording this show last week, I did the math when I got home and started looking at all the Twitter chatter and things like that. And then obviously the confirmation came out the next day. But during our show is when the accident with Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau happened. Just tragic. Rehearsal dinner for their sister, and they're decided to bike home. They're doing nothing wrong, biking home on the shoulder, and some drunk driver just ends their lives and ruins a family, devastates a sport, and you know, you think of everybody impacted, family, friends, fans, organizations. It's just devastating. So absolutely senseless.
Senseless, and a tragedy that it's not an exaggeration to use the word tragedy here. These are two young men who had done nothing to put themselves in harm's way. They weren't blurring lines of any kind. They weren't taking unnecessary risks. And through no fault of their own, you wind up with a life-changing experience. And I can't imagine being the sister and knowing that for the rest of life, your wedding will be remembered as the time that you lost your brothers. I can't imagine being the parents and having two sons lost simultaneously like that. I can't imagine the teammates, the organization. There's just so many people that have lost here, and my prayers go out to them, because I can't. There are certain things that I just can't even imagine what it would be like to be in that spot, and losing two sons who were completely innocent in the situation would be. I'm not sure how I'd ever go on. I don't know how I'd ever get back to normal life if that were to happen.
It's so hard to imagine. It's still so hard to accept and understand how this is possible and to believe. And, you know,
I have two sons, and I can just imagine, you know, like, I don't even want to think about it, but I've got a daughter getting married next June. And let's just say that it was my two sons pedaling home from the rehearsal dinner, and that this happened. I mean, I just, as a parent, I can't imagine how you go on. How you wouldn't live the rest of your life asking why and how every single day, and having everything you do in life remind you of that moment, of those two boys, you were all just together at a point where you bring family together. There are a few times where the celebration is probably more pure than somebody in your family getting married. Mm-hmm. And to have everybody together like that, and that's the last time you saw them alive, I just can't even put into words what I imagine that would feel like to be a family member.
Yep. I didn't know Johnny well, but I've interviewed him a number of times, including last September 12th at the NHL Media Tour, which I'll actually be at next week in Las Vegas. And I was just, first of all, I was looking at photos of the sit down, and it's one of those, it's those live photos, so they're like videos for a couple seconds, and that's pretty shattering. And the only thing I'll tell you about him is every time I've ever interviewed him, and I've interviewed him in scrums, and I've interviewed him one-on-one a number of times, always so friendly, constantly smiling, so interesting, and just very fun, and just an infectious personality. So you could just see how this is going to be so hard for everybody, especially his teammates, to accept. He just recruited his best buddy and Sean Monahan to come play there, and it's truly unreal. And the other thing I'll remember, and it wasn't a long conversation, but 2 years ago we're in Columbus, and Guy Gaudreau went to a lot of, because it was close to home. That's one big reason why he went to Columbus, to that coast. But he didn't want to play in Jersey where he was going to actually be at home. And so Guy Gaudreau used to go to a lot of the morning skates for the home games and come to a lot of the practices. And I'm talking to Jeff Rimmer in the stands, and we go stand by the Zamboni entrance, and there's Guy, and Jeff introduced me to Guy, and we chatted for a while. And that was at the beginning of his Columbus career, his sons, and he was just so excited to see him play for the Blue Jackets and be close to home for as many years as he signed there. And just to see this now, it's just terrible. And look, I mean, it just shows you again how life is precious, that things can change in an instant and unforeseen. I mean, look what just happened yesterday at Park Tavern.
Unbelievable.
Some jackass that's had 5 DWIs in the past has a 0.325 blood alcohol and ends the life of a single mom of 3 girls whose mom used to work at the restaurant, and injures 9 people, I believe, and kills an ICU nurse. I mean, this is just beyond tragic, and it just shows you. I mean, they're just they're just sitting on a patio on a beautiful summer night, and boom. I mean,
these are the situations where it's not like anybody there had done anything to put themselves at risk.
Yeah,
they're just sitting on a patio minding their own business. And this clown, I read one of the quotes. I shouldn't even guess because I read somebody had said that they heard him he called somebody after the accident.
Said that he hit the wrong pedal.
I hit the gas instead of the brake. Well, and then I hit something. You drove into a frickin' patio, and I am shocked that. Number one, I mean, I didn't even know you could get 5 DUIs and still be allowed to have a driver's license. That seems ridiculous to me. But number two, like 0.325, what in the world?
Yeah.
I mean, and to think that
I can't even imagine how much you would have to drink to get to that.
I know. There's no way I physically could. And I hope they throw this guy, and he probably has family too, but I hope they throw this guy into a cell and lose the key. I mean, if this guy ever is allowed to live life again after what he did, then there's something wrong with the world.
Yeah, it really is truly unreal, and it's to your point, and I was reading one of the articles on one of the TV stations, news sites today, where he's like twice successfully won appeals because there's that initiator that they put in your car after you have DWA, claimed it was invalid or something was wrong.
You know what I mean? Everybody can make a mistake once, and this isn't a mistake you should make. But 5 times, it's not a mistake anymore. Yeah. You're never going to learn. And hopefully now I don't know if you'd say you learned, because I'm sure he still hasn't learned, but I don't know. It's a terrible situation, and my prayers go out to those families too. It's a terrible way to have life come to an end when it's preventable because just somebody else. Their actions made it unpreventable, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, let's talk about gratefulness a little bit. We had Stephane Veilleux out at the fair on my radio appearance 12 to 3 on Labor Day, and I did a big story in The Athletic about him yesterday and what he's been dealing with. And he was in a car accident on June 19th and broke his C1 vertebrae, and that's it's an important vertebrae. It controls your neck motion. He burst it. People with this type of injury sometimes are paralyzed or worse. And instead of being bitter, he's now in a halo vest. Instead of being bitter, he's anything but. And it's partly for reasons like this, because he sees what happens. There's a poignant story in the bottom of the story. His daughter plays on the same baseball team as Kevin O'Connell's son, and Kevin sees him in the halo in early July and goes up to him to express his, I'm sorry this happened. And Stephane says to him, you know what, it could have been worse. I'm really, really lucky. And 2 days later, Kyrie Jackson dies. And then he sees him right after Kyrie Jackson dies. Now Steph goes over to KOC and tells him, I'm sorry that this happened, but remember that conversation we had last week about gratefulness? It could always be worse. And KOC looks at him and says, isn't that the truth? And he felt the same way last week with the Gaudreau situation. And he feels lucky. He's got the Edina community that has supported him really well. The Wild have supported him incredibly. He's got really good friends in his life. A guy named Brett Peterson here locally, people like Pierre-Marc Bouchard. We saw Wes Walls tweet about him yesterday. I've gotten tons of texts from guys like Mike Rupp and Jamie McLennan. But also his ex-wife, Amy, who's allowed him back into the house to live and be by his 2 kids and sleep. I mean, it's a really unbelievable story.
Yeah, incredible. And he's an incredibly positive guy. It was great to get a chance to chat with him a little bit. And I wish him the best for sure, but he is lucky because I don't know much about back injuries and spine injuries, but from what I do know, the higher up that injury goes, the more likely paralysis is to be the result. And he's lucky he's walking around with full motion of his arms and legs and everything. And, who knows what'll happen, but you're probably lucky to be alive, let alone, have function.
Yeah, and he'll have a CT scan on September 17th and to check on the bone growth, and it'll be determined then if he'll wear the halo for longer or could take it off. But the hope is that eventually that he's going to avoid surgery, which would be fusing the skull to the spine, and that obviously would take away the majority of his mobility for the rest of his life in his neck. Let's answer a couple Twitter questions, Anthony, and then we'll call it a wraps, and we'll do a show next week when I get back from Vegas, and then we got the September 19th live show. I love this question. We're getting it more and more. Darren Walker says, the Timberwolves are looking for a new arena. The Wild are looking for massive renovations in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you envision a scenario where the 2 teams get together and build just one state-of-the-art modern-day facility, better, more economical, common sense, and basically he continues and says, then you could move both AHL affiliates to XL Energy Center. That will not happen. The Wild, as long as Craig Leopold owns the team, is not moving to Minneapolis. And so if that's where you're assuming that the Wolves and the Wild would put a team and then have the AHL teams play at XL, it's just not happening. The Wild are not moving out of St. Paul. Anthony.
And there's too much revenue to be had in your own arena. I just don't see any scenario where the 2 of them share.
Yeah. We'll make this the last question. Somebody asked if there's a chance that Dean will take Freddie Gaudreau off the Wild's hands. The one thing I'll say about this is that if the Laine trade happened, there's no doubt in my mind that Philip Gustafson and Freddie Gaudreau were in that trade. It's really the only way that the math would have worked, unless something really unforeseen was in there, like a Jared Spurgeon or a Jonas Berdine or something other. It wasn't them. It had to be Freddie and Philip. So that being the case, there's a chance at some point that maybe you could have flipped Freddie there for a pick or something like that. Now I just can't imagine it would happen. And there's no way to say this eloquently, but just think about this logically. I think trading Freddie Gaudreau there from Don Waddell's perspective, it would be pretty triggering right now after the passing of Johnny Gaudreau. Would be probably considered extremely insensitive and all that stuff. So I just don't think there's a way that Freddie's going there anytime soon. So that's just my opinion. But just thinking about that logically, I just can't imagine Don Waddell is going to be trading for a Gaudreau right now. Wouldn't be fair to the fans, Gaudreau's family. Wouldn't be fair to Freddie. Quite frankly. Anthony, kind of a interesting show all over the map in terms of emotion and things like that. Start with a little humor, ends a little somber, but be safe, everybody. Hug your family and friends and all that type of stuff. All right. Next live show again, September 19th at 7 p.m. We'll see if we can get Veilleux out there. We'll see how his CT scan goes. He was so nice to come to the fair. Maybe we can get him to come out to Tuttles at 7 p.m. on September 19th. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks for joining us at the Aquarius Home Services studio. Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Royal Credit Union, and Feller's Ranch. Talk to you next week, everybody.